2023 is the year when EV battles intensify. Now, in the past, we've seen a lot of new contenders enter the luxury and the entry-level luxury space. But this year is where it gets really interesting because this year is the battle of the budget EVs. And adding some much-needed French quirk to the mix is the all-new Citroën Ë-C3. It's essentially an electrified version of the existing C3 hatchback. It's retrofitted with an electric powertrain. You get a 29.2 kilowatt battery. At least from the outside, not much seems to have changed. Now, that may or may not be to the liking of some, but what the C3 definitely benefits from is a newer design as compared to the Tata Tiago EV, which is something it'll be gunning after directly. That said, it is a very funky looking car. The color schemes are very bright and exciting. It's got alloys. It really reeks of quality on all fronts. Yes, there are a few misses, when you take a look at the overall design, because they've really not done much to distinguish this from the ICE counterpart. And I mean, even this, for example, is essentially just a dummy fuel lid because there's really no fuel tank behind this. And it's unnecessary and could have been done away with. They could have just replaced this panel entirely because charging cap is on the other fender right there, and it's at a perfectly nice position. Can this car, which is from a relatively new player in the market, can it hold its own against giants like Tata Motors and possibly even Mahindra going forward, two brands who seem to have a stronger footing in the EV space? This could very well be the car that really puts Citroën on the map. So let's talk about basic hardware. We've got a 29.2 kilowatt hour battery, and when you think about the fact that the Nexon EV comes with a standard 30.2 kilowatt hour battery, you think we're batting in the same power levels, but this gets about 57 horsepower only, and that's when you compare it to the Nexon. 57 is actually about 13-14 lower than what the Tiago EV gets. But much like the Tiago EV, all it takes is a 15 amp socket, and in a little over 10.5 hours, you'll have a full charge. So in that sense, it's pretty standard. What I can tell you is that in terms of acceleration, given that its torque figures are higher than the Tiago EV, it does take off very smoothly. The steering has a nice heft to it. So in terms of performance, even when I'm taking a corner flatly, it actually does hold up pretty well. So it feels like a very well-engineered, solidly built product, and I have to give Citroën credit for that. But I have lost charge relatively quickly on some occasions, and even with about 92%, which is when I started, I saw a charge of about 210. Now, are those niggles that they might iron out when the car is launched within a month? I hope so. But on the whole, don't expect anything north of 220, even though 250 is a conservative figure that you can sort of take into account. Now, that aside, what else is it really good at? Well, it has two modes. So there's no sport, you just have eco and you have standard. Eco is where the regen mode is a little more effective. So it's not exactly single pedal drive and it's not at the same level as the Tiagos, but it's still pretty impressive, in fact. However, it does skimp on a few features. There's really not much I can tell because I'm on an absolutely flat surface here, and the roads are, it's a test track. So there's really no way of telling how it performs under duress for a long time, because again, we've not been given much time with this car. And secondly, how the famed Citroën ride quality performs over some bumpy, undulated surfaces. What I can say is that cornering is great, handling seems good, the steering has a good heft to it. However, I do think it could have benefited from a little more power, even though the torque levels are sufficient enough. It's not going to be the gut-crushing, EV acceleration that you're used to with a higher more expensive EVs, but it will be sufficient for city needs. You can be rest assured that this is very much a city car cut in the same mold as the Tiago EV. What you will have to calculate based on its price, which as indicated by the brand will be higher than the Tiago. A safe estimate is about 3 lakhs over the ICE variant, which is around 9.5. But other than that, it still needs to add a few things here and there. Maybe optimize the battery and the range just a bit more before it can be considered a smashing success. Still, as far as city needs go, I would want to rely on this car. I'd want it to work because I think it's got a lot of character. It's got a lot of quirk, and what Citroën's known for. There's a certain design flair that I feel like has been lacking from the budget end of the spectrum. Right, so quickly taking you through the interiors, things are pretty straightforward in here. What I like is the use of really quality plastic materials, something that I particularly find lacking in the Tiago EV. There's a much larger screen here than the one we find in Tata, but at the same time, the gauge cluster happens to be just as analog as the one found in the standard C3. They've really not made any changes there. So you don't have a tachometer. You just have this very analog display which tells you the range, the percentage of your battery, along with all your trip details, odometer details. What I do like is the overall layout of this design. The steering, just the the color schemes that are available make it a much nicer place to be in. But at the same time, I feel like the Tiago is the more well-equipped machine here because it gets multi-regen modes. Yes, it may not be as easy on the eyes and the plastics may be need of a bit of an overhaul, but I think just in terms of the features, it has a few advantages, starting with the fact that as standard you don't really get a reversing cam, but the accessories list that comes with Citroën is pretty extensive, and I'm told that for a little over around 3,500 bucks, rear view camera which is wired directly into the system, so you don't really have to worry about nullifying any kind of warranty or anything like that. So it's completely above board, and the price doesn't seem too high. I can't speak to the quality of it, but at least that concern is gone. I like that there's no rotary knob. I think this is pretty simple. You don't really have any sport mode. There's just eco and standard. There's nothing much happening here. This is just a dead space. I don't know why they gave like a little cavity here, but overall I feel like it feels like a more quality place to be inside, although it does continue to skimp on a few features, which I feel has been to the detriment of the C3 in general, and might be the case here as well, because let's not forget this is a 29.2 kilowatt battery, so it is larger, but it's still in its size. It's not really competing with the Nexon, whose standard battery size is about 30.2 kilowatt per hour. I would say the space utilization is great, quality of the plastics is great, and the overall just funky dashboard design is pretty good. So you've got about 143 Newton meters of torque. In my estimation, on a flat, clean surface like this, the difference in acceleration between the two cars is near as makes no difference. Top speed is limited to about 107 km per hour, so this really isn't a highway car, and that immediately gives that away. Comes with a 30.2 kilowatt hour battery, out of which it squeezes out considerably more power. And that's the one thing working against this car. It's that the power levels, while sufficient for a car of its range, don't really seem that sufficient for the kind of battery size that it carries. Another element is that the regenerative brakes, while effective, are not as effective and as potent as the ones you find in the Tiago EV, where while not really capable of providing single pedal driving, I would say that the Tiago EV with its multi-regen modes allows the car to come to a standstill a lot faster. So, for example, the weight is managed reasonably well. There is not that much other than the electric powertrain that differs, when it comes to this car. And the C3, in my opinion, is already a fairly capable car. In fact, because it misses out on a few bells and whistles, a tachometer being one of them, I feel like it's unfairly been dismissed in favor of some of the more popular hatchbacks in the market. Of course, most of which benefit from a much more extensive service and retail network. But as a standalone product, I say it now and I said it when I drove the C3, there are a lot of things to like about it, the ride quality being chief among them. It's a little hard to say on a butter smooth surface like this, but I reckon this will also have ride as one of the things that lies strongly in its favor. Another thing that I really like about this car, perhaps more than the Tiago EV, is that the steering has a little bit of heft to it. And maybe the budget EV buyer isn't really taking that into account, but I like the fact that it's not light to the point of having no sensation whatsoever. Now, coming to the subject of fast charging, this is capable of, in terms of input, this car can take up to 30 kilowatt of fast charging. So even if you plug it into a bigger one, it'll automatically only consume up to 30 kilowatt of fast charging. In terms of first impressions, this car isn't doing much wrong. In fact, I've been driving it steadily at about 80 to 90 kilometers per hour with little regenerative braking, and it seems to be holding on to its range reasonably well. That said, the whole 320 kilometer range figure is of course under ideal circumstances. So you just have to press the trip gauge. I now have 86.8% charge and just a smidge over 200 kilometers of range. So, can the E3 be Citroën's biggest sales hit yet? Pricing is key, and since it's likely to cost more than the Tiago EV, the Ë-C3 faces an uphill battle. However, there is no denying that with its build quality, customization options, smooth powertrain and eye-catching design, the Ë-C3 is off to a good start.